Okay, welcome back. We now have, in the spirit of interdisciplinarity, a demonstration of a quite different methodology and approach to the question of taste. And I can start off by saying that when we were sitting at dinner the other night, and my former assistant in planning this conference, Chandani, who's standing over here, she explained to me from a chemistry standpoint why I am able to use the natural pectin in a passion fruit shell to make passion fruit jam from the crop in my backyard. I was impressed once again that in many ways cooking is chemistry. I was also impressed by the dream team of student researchers that my Scandinavian department colleague Tim Tangerlini assembled for an ambitious data analysis of the historical development of cookbook ingredients in the Nordic region, hence Tasting Scandinavia. In his team, there is competence in chemistry, data science, and the Nordic languages, as well as interest in developing a modeling instrument that can be used for new data as this project develops. So they're here today to share that modeling and some preliminary results and to suggest future uses of this. So this will be, in a sense, a way of trying to model and map what a flavor network looks like. So I'll introduce the whole team and then I'll turn it over to them, and they are going to have a kind of rotating presentation. So my close friend and colleague, Professor Tim Tangerlini, is the Elizabeth H. and Eugene A. Shurtleff Chair of Undergraduate Education at UC Berkeley, and is a distinguished professor in the Department of Scandinavian and the School of Information at the University of California, Berkeley. He's also the Associate Director of the Berkeley Institute for Data Science and the Faculty Director of the Berkeley Folklore Archive. He's developed computational approaches to stories and storytelling in almost all of his research over the past 3 decades. He's also done extensive field work on topics as diverse as storytelling among paramedics, shamanism in South Korea, and storytelling in rural 19th century Denmark. He has developed generative models of common story genres such as legend, rumor, personal experience, narratives, etc. And his recent work, which was featured in The Guardian, on the BBC, and NPR Science Friday, has focused on conspiracy theories such as Pizzagate and QAnon, and the conspiratorial machinations on social media related to the January 6th insurrection. So you can get a sense of very broad-ranging set of interests, but a thread interest in storytelling, yes. Markus Romanset is an undergraduate student at the University of California, Berkeley, pursuing a dual degree in computer science and economics. He's originally from Bodø in Norway, and he has lived across Norway, Spain, Italy, and Germany due to upbringing in a military family. He has background from working on projects with companies such as NVIDIA, JP Morgan Chase, and SoFi, in addition to leading product development at a Y Combinator-backed startup. And I said those words and I don't understand them. So his main area of focus is in integrating AI, which I have heard of, in industries historically resistant to technological innovation. Alankruta Malhotra is a junior at the University of California, Berkeley, doing a BA in data science and economics with a minor in English. She's interested in the intersection of computing, education, and narrative. At Berkeley, she serves as an undergraduate student instructor for a course called Foundations of Data Science, and directs a no-cost data science boot camp that has introduced more than 400 high school students to statistical reasoning and computing. She designed and implemented an English and creative writing curriculum for over 350 deaf students delivered through Indian Sign Language. She is currently investigating machine learning approaches for Indian Sign Language recognition and generation to scale high-quality resources for learners and educators. Chandani Dialani is currently a master's student. She graduated from Berkeley last spring and is now down at our sister campus in UCLA studying chemical engineering, where she works on developing novel technologies for carbon dioxide capture and conversion. Formerly, she studied with Tim and worked on network analysis and narrative frameworks. She was also my trusted research assistant for the early stages of planning this symposium before she left to start her program at UCLA. And whatever conceptual coherence there is to this symposium, I put a lot on Chandani. So I'm very excited. We call this the Dream Team, and I'm interested to hear how this project has been developing. Go ahead, Tim.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks to all of you. Thanks, of course, to the student work researchers here who've really done a lot of the work for this project. And what we've been hearing over the course of the past 2 days is the importance of storytelling. Storytelling through flavors, storytelling through recipes, storytelling through cuisine, and how that creates community. And so I think we couldn't have asked for a better lead-in to our work, which is trying to understand broadly how Scandinavia may have tasted through the ages, right? And so one of the things that when we study literature and when we study culture, we have a general sense of certain types of concerns, but we don't really remember, we can't really recover how things tasted. And so we thought maybe we could look at historical cookbooks to get an understanding of how this works. So we've already heard that foodways are a form of cultural expression. And as a folklorist, I'm really interested in expressive cultural practices and their interdependence. Foodways, of course, as we've been hearing, change not only with the availability of foodstuffs, but changes in economic organization, changes in political organization, and even in changes in household organization, who's doing the cooking. And so through that recognition, understanding, we can see that foodways gives us an incredible window into aspects of culture. They're one of the first encounters outsiders have with a target culture. They can also be subject to stereotypes. Food encapsulates these broad series of norms, beliefs, and values, what I call cultural ideology. And of course, it also can provide comfort. So we all know this concept of comfort food. I was just talking to Robert after this wonderful lunch we had, and he said, oh, well, comfort food, and that really was. It was a series of comfort foods. And that creates a sense of bond. And so can we also recover historically what those comfort foods might have been? Foodways are ephemeral. They're often not captured in historical artifacts. And so we kind of have to interpolate them. But one of the historical artifacts we do have that at least gestures towards those foodways are cookbooks that we can work with through the years. So why study flavor? Well, food is much more than flavor, as we've been experiencing over these past 2 days. There's mouthfeel, there's texture, there's process. There's also innovation and variation. All of these wonderful ideas that have been bubbling up over these past 2 days. But flavor is a key component to all of this as well, and it's linked to memory. And so the Madeleine there from Proust, and what turns into me a leverpastei with red beets on rye bread, experience, enjoyment. All of those are wrapped up in flavor and those experiences. So it's no accident that when Proust's narrator in Search of Times Past bites into a Madeleine, the entire past comes flooding back. Just like in Ratatouille, where his entire past comes flooding back. And when I just have to look at this slide, and my childhood comes flooding back to me as well. There's a great deal of enjoyment in that. We can use flavor then to begin to estimate what Scandinavia has tasted like over these past 150 years. And you'll see soon why I say 150 plus or minus years. we can find commonalities across the region, and then also differences both across time and place. And so when we started this project, we thought, well, we'll get some historical cookbooks, and then we'll just, we'll work from there. There's a kind of a paucity of research into ethnographic research into foodways in the early 19th century. It's not what folklorists were collecting. So we're going to use cookbooks as a first approximation of foodways. And by extension, using a cookbook, we can get to ingredients, and from ingredients, we can get to flavor. Now, cookbooks really become a thing during the 18th and early 19th centuries because they emerge kind of as markers of class and belonging in these emerging farmer and bourgeois groupings, right? So you need a reading public, and you also need a public that is going to be cooking for themselves. And so that's a presupposition of the cookbook. Now, the history of Nordic cookbooks is very well described, and so that was very lucky for us. People have gone back and done things like Danske Kober from 1616 to 1974, which is a bibliographic survey of all of these cookbooks, and we can use that as a way to find our cookbooks. There's a wonderful work by Caroline Nuvang where she goes and shows you all of the different periods of cookbook publication in Denmark. And I think it's kind of interesting to see that the number of cookbooks published during the decade of the Danish bankruptcy drops precipitously. But as we go up through the 1840s, and then particularly with the Danish Constitution, the Fri Forfatning, we get a different social organization, and we start to get the move into cities and market towns and the emergence of a bourgeois cooking public who want to have recipes that also align with this national emergence of either the Danish nation, the Norwegian nation, or the Swedish nation. So we're really looking at Scandinavia. As Nordic economies changed and the reading public expanded, there's increased need for materials aimed at these smaller households, both in rural areas and the newly emerging urban areas, as a way of also creating a sense of this is who we are, and this is our food. Locally sourced foods were often healthier, more readily available than cuisines that weren't rooted in the experiences and traditions of the people. So we get to move away from the cooking of the aristocratic classes to something that's more recognizable as a Scandinavian cuisine. They moved away a little bit from a heavy reliance on spices, partly because that was extremely expensive. The kolonivarer, and this is a picture actually of a Danish colony in the West Indies, but there were also colonial outposts along the eastern coast of India where a lot of the spices were coming in. And so the whole idea of certain spices were an important yet secondary ingredient in all of this. Now, early cookbooks had very broad references to how to make things. It's sort of like, yes, you take the fish and you do that thing we do with fish. That would be the recipe. As you get into more sort of cookbooks that this reading public wants, they really want instructions, and so you start to get consistent ingredient names. And a little side note here: as part of our process, we have to run a translation step. And we were much working on sort of mathematical sort of models of this. We missed one of the obvious labels that, in my mind, corn. The Scandinavian speakers, you hear that as grain. I saw it as grain, but it's being translated, it's misspelled. It's now in English, it says corn, which would be maize. And that's not a thing in Scandinavia. So just keep that in mind when you see our slides. Right? Just make that mental substitution of the C with a K. Everything will be good. Consistent measures, consistent instructions for methods, temperatures, and times. And so then preparing this food becomes part of this imagined community that everybody in this country is also preparing these foods or could prepare these foods. So similar experience of preparation and, importantly, taste. Now, we include an example of an emigrant cookbook as a means for modeling what Swedes in America would cook to recover the home country and nostalgia. And so we're working today with 3 cookbooks, one from Denmark, one from Norway, and one from Sweden. Some of the frontispieces kind of give you an idea of the evolution of these cookbooks. If we go back to the 17th century, these were high-class kitchens. This was not something for most households. But as we get into the mid-19th century, we get things like home economics, how to keep house. And so it's almost it's not almost, it is an instructional book in how to keep house. This is the famous Vinsnes cookbook from Norway in 1846. The very well-known Frøken Jensen's, which is a model of our work here today. The famous Faroese cookbook, how many of you must have this on your shelves? I can't even count, from Torshavn. And then, of course, this very famous Swedish cookbook, and I want you to note the title, Our Cookbook, right? And so this idea of national cooking, quite important. Wanted to point out this idea from unstructured recipe to structured recipe, and that's a big transition in these cookbooks, and something that helped our work immensely as we moved into these structured cookbooks. Now, while we're working with cookbooks from all of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, we used Frøken Jensen's as a model for our project for a number of reasons. First, it's not in Faktura, and working with Faktura in a digital sort of context is extremely difficult. The recipes were largely regular. The ingredients were largely consistent, so a much smaller vocabulary space. And it's an example of a national cookbook that has extraordinary reach and distribution at the time of publication. Longevity, indexicality for Danish food preparation. I don't know, how many of you are Danes? How many of the 2 Danes know Frøken Jensen's? Yeah, so, yeah, you can't not have it, right? It's just there. And so we use that as our model. This is from 1901. And I actually love the cover of this because you can see it really is focused on these urban landscapes and the emergence of a nuclear home cooking family. So I'm going to hand over to Chandani for the important. The rest of the stuff is really the more deep things, and that's where the students come in. Oh, you got one.
Hello. So we've heard a lot about cookbooks.
Is yours on?
I think so.
Yeah.
You can hear me? Cool. So we've heard a lot about cookbooks so far, and now we're talking about how you can, what makes a dish taste like a dish. And that's where, as Mark pointed out earlier, chemistry comes in. So you're probably familiar with the concept that everything is a mix of chemical compounds. Same goes with food. So here we're going to run through an example of a very classic Scandinavian dish, not Swedish, but like fish soup. Shows up in all of the Nordic countries in various forms. I made this illustration based off of just a photo I found, so I hope that it's accurate, but moving on. We'll look at we'll look at some of the ingredients in this dish and what sort of chemical compounds they have. So ingredient number 1, shrimp. In shrimp you'd find, amongst many molecules, thiamine hydrochloride. Along with shrimp, there's potentially some sort of fish. In this case, we'll consider salmon, there we go, which has heptanoic acid and thiamine hydrochloride, incidentally. Moving on, we have cream in the soupy portion of this dish, and there you would find non-anoic acid and thiamine hydrochloride, incidentally. You're getting this idea that a lot of these ingredients have similar compounds, right? You have potatoes, just to make the dish more filling. And in potatoes, you'd find neomenthol, myrtenol, and then as a garnish, and for a more fresh flavor, you have chives. And there you'd find geraniol and menthone, and also neomenthol, incidentally. So we're getting this idea that these foods have lots of shared molecules. And from that, you can create a sense of a network. that all of these molecules that are interacting with your palate, triggering sensory, like neural impulses, are also shared amongst lots of foods, and that sort of gets you closer to what a dish should be comprised of. One note is that these molecules are within like the raw form of the food, typically, and they will change in some shape or form as you cook them and as they react amongst themselves. And that's a consideration that's something we're aware of within this project, but that we choose to not consider within this because of how difficult it is to figure out chemical reactions and all of the possible permutations and what's actually happening when you cook a dish. Moving on. So we've talked about what we should do for each dish, but now we need to find a repository of lots of recipes. And as Tim explained, cookbooks are a really good way to do this. So here's an example of a recipe from Fröken Jensen. For the sake of my linguistic ability, we're going to translate it to English. And here you can see that it's pretty easy to grab all of the ingredients within the thing. And this is essentially what we're doing in our computational process, which we'll get into more detail later. And so now we have ingredients, but how do we find information about flavors? And incidentally, there's a really nice public database that's available to all that will give you this information. So we just talked about how cream has non-anoic acid and thiamine hydrochloride. And if you look it up on this database called FoodDB, you'd get a table of all of the possible molecules within. So you can see that there are several possibilities: tetradecanoic acid, octadecanoic acid, non-anoic acid. And within these molecules, you also have information about what flavor or impulse, what neural impulses each of them trigger. So octanoic acid in this example is described as fatty, mild, and odorless. And you can do this for all of the ingredients and within all of your recipes. So now we have an idea that we have lots of recipes from a cookbook. We can get ingredients from those recipes, and with these molecule databases, you can link them to flavor compounds. So by logic, you can link the flavor compounds back to recipes, and you have this interconnected database now. And what you can do with this interconnected database is make a flavor network. And as an example, we have one from a canonical piece a canonical work in this field by Wawa An, who works at the University of Virginia now. And this is an example of a flavor network. You can see that, so this one specifically is lots of ingredients. That's all of the circles you see over here. And they're linked to each other by flavor compounds, which flavor compounds they share. As the lines get thicker, that indicates that there are more flavor compounds being shared. As the nodes get bigger, that indicates that they're more prevalent in your recipes in the composite recipe database. So for example, olive oil shows up in a lot of recipes, as does onion, as does garlic, things you'd expect. And now that we have a general sense of recipes, ingredients, flavor compounds, a conceptual understanding of what we're trying to do, I'm going to hand it over to Marcus, who's going to talk about the methods in more detail, some of the trouble we had, those sorts of things.
Great. Yeah, so as Chalini said, we're talking about the methods. So basically the process from a computational perspective, how we went from going from a cookbook to a flavor network. So what we see here is kind of a very abstract overview of our pipeline, and then we'll dive into each one of these buckets, kind of talk through a lot of the problems that we had, and also some of the good things that happen as well. So you see, we first start with pre-processing it. So that means that we take the cookbook and we basically have to prepare it before we put it into our pipeline. Then we have to translate and kind of divide them into individual recipes. Then we got to format those recipes. And then comes the fun part of matching those recipes and those ingredients we figure out from the recipes with our flavor database. And then in the end, hopefully, we'll be able to create some really interesting flavor networks that'll be able to tell us a lot more about these flavors and kind of what Scandinavia tastes like during this period. So the first step was sourcing the cookbooks. So which cookbooks should we pick out? So this is an example of a cookbook from Praktisk Illustrerad, which is the Swedish cookbook. And there's a couple of problems that we discovered very early on with these cookbooks. The first one is that the default OCR on the PDF is set to English. So with OCR is that if you ever had a PDF document and you try to like basically just scribble over the text and copy paste text out of it, that's the OCR on top of it. And the default is English, but these cookbooks are obviously not in English, so it doesn't handle other languages very well. And the second one is that the text is in Scandinavian. And if you're from Scandinavia, you know, we have these very weird characters called like a, o, that the computer really, really doesn't like. So we have to be very careful about figuring out a way where we can kind of tell the computer that, hey, you have to be nice to these special characters so you don't throw all kinds of weird errors at us. So the solution was that we basically redid that OCR on top of the PDF using like a different language model. And we basically had to do this for the specific language that we wanted. So if it was a Norwegian cookbook, we had to make sure that we told the model that, hey, this cookbook is in Norwegian. You should make sure that, you know, you're prepared to deal with AO like the Norwegian language has. And the third problem was that the text needs to be compatible with translation tools. So in Scandinavia, you kind of have the main languages, and you also have a lot of derivations of those languages. For example, in Norway, there's something called Nynorsk, which is like New Norwegian, which these translation tools are really, really bad at translating. So we want to avoid those kind of archaic languages and those kind of non-traditional languages and kind of stick to the mainstream ones to make sure that we don't have any issues when we actually go about translating the cookbooks. So the second step was actually translating and extracting the recipes. So here you see an example of a recipe from Billy Mat, which is the Norwegian cookbook. So our overall goal here was to really extract the individual recipes and to be able to translate them. So the first part was really recognizing the structure in each cookbook and split the text into different recipes. So a couple issues here is that it's very hard to figure out where one recipe starts and it ends. For example, there's no break symbols or consistency across the text. And a lot of times we have to manually tell the LLM, hey, if you see this, it probably means that, you know, this recipe stopped here, starts here, and this is how you should go about dividing them up. And if you look at the picture up here, what's really interesting here is that you both have the ingredient number and you have the price number. And you might look at this and say, wow, you know, the entire dinner costs 0.4 kroner, which is like 40 cents. It's nothing. But, you know, from a computational perspective, that means we have two numerical numbers there, and it's really hard to tell the model that this is how many grams of sugar goes in it, and this is the price. So in these cases, we kind of had to come up with a lot of edge cases to be able to handle kind of the weird cookbook structures like this. And the second part was just translating them using a GPT model from OpenAI. And some issues here is that some words aren't easily translatable. There's no English equivalent of it. Examples of this can be stuff like herring or sod, which are very instrumental to Scandinavian cuisine. But in the US or in the English language, there's not really any equivalent translations that can be used to describe these. And there's also some recipes that reference other parts of the cookbook. So it could be like, hey, here's a steak, and you can use the red wine sauce found on page 83 in order to put it on your steak. And this is absolutely terrible for us because we can't, you know, recurse through the entire cookbook and figure these out. So in those cases, we unfortunately just had to ignore them. But we made sure that our cookbooks didn't have too many cross-references all over the place. So then came time to actually extract the ingredients from the cookbook. So what we did from step 2 is that we basically used LLM to put it into this like text format that's more easily parsable from our large language model. And then we just used, let's see. Yeah, and then we just used like the OpenAI model to just tell, hey, go into this piece of text and put out all the recipes and all the methods that we use to cook it. And what's really cool is that these LLMs are actually really good at doing that. So we could basically reuse this for any cookbook, and we didn't really have to do much manual intervention. You know, these AIs are very good at following instructions as long as the instructions are consistent and they're easy for them to understand. So this was a very big victory for us, and this is really, I think, where the AI really shined in this case. And step 4 was merging the databases. So now that we have, you know, all these kind of flavors and ingredients down here, the question is, how do we match those kind of unconventional composite ingredients with our flavor database? So the way we did this was that we essentially took each one of these lines you see down here, it could be like a better pastry or, for example, decorations. Then we split each one of these things into 3 and 3 words. So you can say like decorations such as tomatoes, etc. And then for each one of these, we did a mathematical computation called an embedding. So this is essentially a mathematical way of describing how similar something is to a different thing. So we did this on our database, and we did this on our ingredients. And we kind of cross-referenced them and figured out, mathematically speaking, what is the ingredient that makes the most sense here. So for example, for the last example with olives, truffles, and mushrooms, the mushrooms was the ingredient that came out of there, since that has the most prevalence, because you have both truffles and mushrooms in that case. So that was kind of how we went along with kind of creating some consistency here, because a lot of these cookbooks had very different names for things, very different ingredients, but this way we can kind of standardize everything across the board. So now that we kind of have these ingredients, we have these very cool data sets, I'm going to pass it off to Alankruta, who's going to talk about extracting these networks and actually creating the models.
Okay, awesome. So we have all of this data, and this data seems to live in 4 layers, right? We have cookbooks. From these cookbooks, we know we're able to get recipes. From the recipes, we know each recipe has ingredients, and we know each ingredient has flavor compounds. So that's a lot of data. And we want to be able to make pretty pictures out of it, because that's what we do as data scientists. So we'll need to take a multi-scale, multi-path approach to understand the overall flavor landscape. And we do this by making 3 specific pretty pictures. The first is we take ingredients and link them to other ingredients if they share similar flavor compounds, so similar chemical compounds. We also take recipes and link them to other recipes if they share ingredients. And we take flavors and link them to other flavors if they're in the same recipe. So you'll see that in a minute, so don't be confused. But this is a lot of data, right? And we're putting it in circles and lines, and it looks really dense and difficult to understand sometimes. So what we want to do then is take these network visualizations and decompose them so we can really see what is the backbone, what's holding this graph together. So let's see, what do we get? And let's discuss it. Before we make any sort of networks, let's talk about recipe sizes per cookbook. What we wanted to do was we wanted to take our 3 cookbooks and understand generally how many ingredients does a recipe have. So we did that by making a distribution of the recipe sizes per cookbook. And what you see here is that the mode of each of these graphs, which just means the peak of them, is roughly around 5 for all 3 cookbooks, which is pretty interesting. So the sweet spot for the recipes in all 3 cookbooks was about 5 ingredients per recipe. Okay, so we know it's about 5 ingredients. What does the ingredient space look like? Let's look at the top ingredients per cookbook in a sense that how connected are these ingredients to other ingredients. So when I'm talking about top ingredients here, what we're really talking about is how connected is, say, corn with a K, to these other ingredients in Fröken Jensen, in sense of how many flavor compounds does it share with these other ingredients. So what you see for Fröken Jensen, and excuse my pronunciation, I will learn slowly, is that it's corn, carrot, and apple. And that's actually the same as is for Praktisk. But for Billigmat, you see an absence of corn, or grain in this case. And instead, you have pepper or spice come up, right? So this is a very nice visualization. You can see a lot of things, but you also miss a lot of things. What do you miss? Well, you miss what these things are actually connected to. I'm saying corn is pretty centrally connected in Fröken Jensen, but to what, right? And to answer that question, let's look at a flavor network. So this is an ingredient space flavor network of Fröken Jensen. And for the next couple of slides, I will be mainly talking about Fröken Jensen. What you see is you see carrot, corn, and apple, which is what we just saw in the bar graph before this. So these are the most central ingredients. And to give you an idea of what you're looking at, all of these circles, they're ingredients. And the lines between those circles, they're drawn if 2 ingredients share chemical compounds. So you can see carrot seems to share chemical compounds with a lot of ingredients around it, which is why it's a pretty central ingredient for the Fröken Jensen space. Okay. We looked at ingredients to ingredients with flavor as the edges. What if we look at ingredients to ingredients connected by recipes? You get this pretty picture, which is really, really hard to read. It has nice colors, but I don't really understand what's going on, right? What's going on in this picture is you have circles being ingredients again, but they're connected if they appear in the same recipe, right? But it's very difficult to read. And since it's so difficult to read, we wanted to do what I mentioned earlier, which was a network decomposition. We want to make it nicer and easier to look at. So what we do is we use a maximum spanning tree algorithm to get this, which looks significantly nicer than what we just looked at. And here what you see is you see 5 sort of main clusters. You see eggs, water, sugar, salt, and butter, right? What this means is that these are the ingredients that are holding together Froken-Jensen. They're being paired with a lot of other ingredients, like water is being paired with ice cream and cloves and barley, and being used in recipes together. Two interesting things to note here is first the presence of this vinegar cluster. Froken-Jensen has a lot of pickling recipes, and that's why you see that vinegar cluster there linked to the salt cluster. Another interesting thing to note is the meat bouillon cluster next to butter there. Meat bouillon is used for stock, and it's very fatty, and that's why it's linked to butter, because it's used with butter in recipes. So that's the ingredient to ingredient on recipe space. What if we look at recipe to recipe on the ingredient space? So we flip what we just looked at and look at how recipes are connected if you connect them in terms of whether they share ingredients or not. To begin with, we look at a higher level overview of what it looks like. What you see here are these super nodes of sorts, right? Soups and stews, that's not one recipe, that's a cluster of recipes. So these are sort of high-level cluster of recipes, and they're linked to other clusters of recipes as to whether they share ingredients with that cluster or not. So you see soups and stews has an edge going to baked porridge and goods, which means baked goods and porridges share ingredients with soups and stews. So those 2 recipe clusters share ingredients. The really interesting thing I would like to point out here is the presence of these 2 nodes at the bottom, the French-style haute cuisine and French classical preparations. This is very interesting because this is the emergence of cooking, status cooking within Froken-Jensen. Remember what Tim was talking about earlier in terms of the fact that these cookbooks were being written for the reading public and for the bourgeoisie. And this is this sort of aspirational tendency of this cookbook to include French-style cooking, which is really interesting in this case. So I said earlier that these nodes are super nodes, and they have a lot of recipes within them. What does it look like if we don't cluster them? Yeah, it looks like that, which is a lot. But it's actually really interesting. So that huge cluster of green there is soups and stews. And it's a pretty big cluster. It has 208 recipes, which is why the node size in the previous slide was so big, right? And then you see that it's very closely linked to the baked goods and porridges cluster, which is cluster 1 right there, with a lot of different edges coming out. So those 2 recipe clusters share a lot of ingredients, because remember, we're still talking about the recipe ingredient space. So let's take a look at what the sparse recipes look like here. Or let me rephrase. Let's look at what the French clusters look like. If I can go. No, we're going to Okay, yes.
Yeah, presentations.
Christopher, maybe you could entertain us while we're... No, we should be good now. You've already got it once.
Okay, cool. So we looked at these, and we said that these clusters, say 5 and 1, so soups and stews and baked goods and porridges are connected because you see those gray lines there. So we know that those 2 recipe clusters are sharing a lot of ingredients together. Okay. Now let's take a look at those French clusters we were talking about. That's 4 and 16. The interesting thing that you'll notice about these clusters is they're very sparse. They don't seem to be as densely clustered together as the other Danish clusters we were looking at. And this is interesting because this means that the French recipes present within Froken-Jensen shared less ingredients with each other. So these recipes were more different from each other than the other recipes in the book. It's also interesting to note that This is different from the clustering that Fronk and Jensen does itself. So if you go to the table of contents, this is not the clustering that's present. This is like a new sort of clustering we've done where you can see French food pop up. Okay, so that was looking at recipes to recipes in the ingredient space. What if you break down the ingredient space into their flavors? Well, then you get this graph, which is a lot to look at. And it's basically almost fully connected, which means every ingredient seems to be connected to every other ingredient. Every circle seems to be connected to every other circle. And that's why you see a mess of lines, right? This might be why, at that time, Denmark tasted so much alike, because there were so many shared flavor compounds between different ingredients. And remember, flavor is what we're using as a proxy for taste. So this is quite interesting, but this is very immensely difficult to read, and that's why we decompose it. So I'll hand it over to Tim to talk about the decomposition.
Great, yeah, and I think there's hello, yes. I think there's a very interesting thing that just happened in that previous graph, because what we see is the Danish cooking likes to share recipes, or likes to share flavors across recipes. So they might, ultimately taste and feel and look different, but they've got some underlying shared flavor compound space that could be very different than other types of cuisines. So we were looking at those very dense graphs, and dense graphs are very hard to work with. A lot of times you'll see these visualizations like, wow, look at this amazing graph, I've got all these lines and stuff, and you can put color on it too, and it looks absolutely amazing. But they do not tell you much about the structure. So we did a novel black screen decomposition. It's called black screen decomposition for a reason. So we apply this black screen over the network, and once you pull that black screen over the network, we can break the graph up into subgraphs. Now, a normal way of doing that is by node degree, but we actually do this a slightly different way. We use something called an edge degree peeling. So that tells me all of the edges that cut across different layers of the graph. Unfortunately, you also still get these very tightly, I think there's an animation here. There isn't. There's nothing? Yes. Oh yeah, so you get these very tight cores like that circle graph layout, and we can see these diverse ingredients. Now, by diverse, I mean this ingredient appears across many, many different recipes and many different layers of the flavor space. But we can also find the backbone of that level of the decomposition. Next slide. And that, again, corn K shows and is also kind of confirmatory, but this is really the spine that's holding all of Fronk and Jensen together at a very high level. So we've got dill and pepper and all of these basically spices and extra flavoring compounds here. We've got the carrot, an interesting appearance of cashews, almonds, and then we've got some fruits up here. We've got a lot of grains here, and then we've got this this very interesting and yet small vegetable space, and then we've got the apple, peach, rhubarb, lingonberry space up there in the corner, and so we can apply this type of decomposition to each one of the cookbooks. And we can see we get a different spine for praktisk mad for Swedes in America. And I think what's interesting here is we start to see the emergence of non-Scandinavian ingredients into that space because they've come to the United States. And what is it that you can do as backfill for Swedish comfort food, which is what you're trying to recover, but in this new context. And so this is also what Vincent was talking about, the idea that cooking is part of a living culture. And then if we can look at something for billig mat. Now, billig mat is a really interesting thing. It's a small pullout from a much larger Norwegian cookbook that really is focused on cooking as economically as possible, right? So it's trying to reach the broadest range of Norwegian people cooking. And here we've got oats instead of corn, K-corn, which is probably a lot more accessible. But there we've got barley, wheat. You see, if we aggregated those together, we would get back to the K-corn that we mislabeled in some of the other graphs. But I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to see. What is it that's at the highest level holding together all three of these cookbooks? And we do these other decompositions. I think there's an animation here. We can see that these were three of the main ingredient flavor cores in Fröken Jensen. And in the next one, we can also see that carrot is this very interesting thing that carrots play such a fundamental role in all three of these cookbooks. And then, of course, with the cheap food thing, we've also got horse, very close to chicken. Next slide. So we've got this diversity as kind of typicality. So if you were thinking about what are typical flavors shared with many other recipes in the cookbooks, we can use these ingredients as a proxy for those. And for each one of these cookbooks, we come up with these different rank lists. So you can just click through those. They're kind of fun to look at. They almost can give you a sense. What I love about the one for the Swedes in America, they really, really wanted cakes. That's really clearly what they were missing from Sweden, because the number of cakes in this high-ranked list is far greater than in any of the other two cookbooks. Then we took an intersection of all of these graphs, and we said, what do they have in common, right? So if you take the intersection, you've got the things that appear in all of the graphs. And I think this is actually kind of intriguing, that if you were going to look for something that is common across all of these cookbooks, is you're going to get things like turnips, barley, carrots, oats, potatoes, cabbage, apples, lingonberries, rhubarb, strawberry, pepper. And somebody just said, that's it, because they've spent a lot of time in Scandinavia. They're like, yeah, you just described Scandinavian cooking, right? So that's the intersection. If we take the union, we get a little bit better spread, but I really was fascinated by the huge importance of this fruit cluster up here in the right. We have these very interesting star-shaped coroniva with cloves and cardamom and things like that. Tarragon, and then we've got the black elderberry cluster up here with nutmeg and pepper and currants. And then we've got the very important beer node, which I find intriguing, that also comes into the cookbook, not just what you're drinking while you're doing the cooking. And then we have the interesting meat cluster over here, but here we see the interesting pull of Billy Mat, right? So it's there in all of the cookbooks. No, it's not there in all of the cookbooks, but here Billy Mat brings us over to the horse meat realm. And so that's the Scandinavian ingredient flavor backbone. There's some limitations in our study, and we will be the first to acknowledge their limitations. But it's been really fun working on this. Recipes only offer an overview of the potential flavor space, right? So it's the overarching potential. Nobody ever cooked all of those. Well, I don't know. We've got these chefs here in the audience. Except for the chefs in the audience, nobody has ever cooked all of the recipes in these things. But the potential is there to do it. They don't really tell us anything about what people did. Ingredients also can be incredibly generic. And individual or local implementation can add that degree of taste variation, right? So people are always making recipes their own. And so there's that variation, which ethnographic investigation will help us understand, right? So this is not a replacement for ethnography, but it's a complement to ethnography. Regional interpretations go beyond ingredients. They include this improvisation, personalization, and then the flavor modules that we're using are necessarily general. There's no real method for recovering actual flavors. Even brand names change taste over time. Fröken Jensen is actually kind of interesting. I'd never noticed this before, but there's so many brand names that are referred to in these recipes. We see that in a lot of the cookbooks. But those can change over time. But the flavor networks then give us this overview of flavor space and help us understand flavor vocabularies and dialects of these newly forming nations, regions, and communities. So what are our next steps? My first next step is to make sure that none of these students graduate, right? And I'm working very hard to keep them here because they're so key to our work that I can't let them go out and have a life. We began by asking, how did Scandinavia taste in the past? And in our investigations, we confirmed a broad degree of consistency across all the Scandinavian countries' ranges of tastes. But we identified some of the particularities, maybe even peculiarities, in the case of some of the more challenging fermented dishes. And when we get to the Icelandic and Faroese cookbooks, we'll see if we can test that, of the different national cuisines. We also got interesting hints at changes in taste. And this is where the historical element is going to come in. Because, as Chandani pointed out, our pipeline now is able to ingest and work through any cookbook. I love the intrusion of French cooking in Fröken Jensen. That really is this sort of the status cooking, right? It's just almost like you could pluck those out, and Fröken Jensen would just be fine as a Danish cookbook. And then they emerge in there in very interesting places. And then the American ingredients in the immigrant cookbook. And then the intense focus, as Marcus pointed out, on trying to make these things as cheaply as possible. Because Norway at the time was incredibly poor. So future work. We're hoping to work on this idea of extending it to many more cookbooks. We now have a pipeline that allows us to do this consistently across cookbooks. Mai Haugen just 2 or 3 days ago sent me an email. Teresa Folvik, one of my colleagues there, she said, we have now transcribed all of the Norwegian handwritten cookbooks from 1780 to 1825. And wouldn't you like to work with those? And then she just sent me all the data. So yes, thank you very much, Teresa. Shout out to Teresa. Right on. We also want to investigate changes over a broader period of time to understand different flows and trajectories in flavor over the past 200 years. Where are Nordic flavors going to end up? And so we have this kind of n-dimensional sort of attractors model. And then I want to incorporate a more sophisticated model of cooking methods, as Chandani mentioned, and then the interaction between flavors over the course of a meal. Right, that there's a story that's being told as you sit down to a meal, as you move between these different dishes and you move towards the conclusion of a meal. And I want to be able to figure out some way of doing what we call pathfinding over a recipe space or over a flavor space. We maybe want to imagine an embedding space, the large flavor model with these attractors and flows over this concept landscape, right? So you wouldn't only just have large language models and large sound models and large motion models, but you would also have a large flavor model, right? And so you can embed things into this space. And then I want to explore the emergence of ethnic cooking in Scandinavia, probably starting in the early 1960s when this really starts to become explored in positive and inclusive ways. Which cuisines? I don't know. How did the flavor integrate with the existing flavor profiles of Nordic cooking? We have this idea of either flavor matching or flavor divergence. In Southeast Asia, large parts of Asia, you have divergent flavors going into the same dish, whereas in a lot of Northern European cooking, you have, as we saw here, complementary flavors that are kind of paired. And then maybe doing some predictive analytics. How would this recipe land in a Nordic context, and what should it be paired with? Which flavors and flavor profiles would resonate with eaters and offer unexpected yet enjoyable, within the range of likelihood, inventions? Personally, I have to thank this team. These guys are amazing. And then I want to thank the Berkeley Nordic Center, the Berkeley Department of Scandinavian. Thanks, boss. the Cultural Analytics Group here at Berkeley and the Berkeley Institute for Data Science, the Division of Arts and Humanities, and some of our colleagues who gave us inspiration and help. Y.Y. Yarn at the University of Virginia, James Abello at Rutgers, and
D.A. Burley.
here at UC Berkeley. So thank you very much, and we're open for questions. I do want to add at the very end that, you know, talking about flavor is a little bit like dancing about architecture. So there's sort of a little bit of a disconnect here. But we've been treated to all sorts of wonderful flavors.
One last note before we get into acknowledgements. Tim is our illustrious leader in all the ways. Any sort of academic support from the past several years. Tim came to me with this project in 2022. As I was graduating from my undergrad here. And this project has lived on miraculously and finally turned into all of this, which is something that's very cool. And it would never have happened without the initial conception in the first place. So also Tim.
I can get there faster, Mark.
I know.
So I'm Svante here. Suddenly I thought of, does age play a role the first time you introduced to a specific taste? I mean, as a little kid, you probably had very strong something. Does that play into the flavor in that country? I mean, one story I have that I told before was growing up in my hometown as a little kid, waiting in line to a movie theater as the matinee. There was this group of young Italian boys. They smelled so different to us. They had garlic in their spaghetti Sunday dinner. I didn't even know about garlic growing up. First time I walked into a restaurant in San Francisco was, oh, what's this smell? I was back in my hometown in that sweaty situation. So does age play a role here, where you bring it forward to your life?
Yeah, so when we started off, I was talking about cultural expressive forms and vernacular culture. So folklore is a study of informal vernacular culture and how it circulates on social networks. And as we grow up in cultures, right, we're enculturated in cultures, not only in the stories and the ways of doing things, but also in food ways, right? Those things that we're exposed to early on become important touchstones of memory. The Madeleine, the Leberwurst sandwich become those important touchstones. I love superpiratos and Turkish pewa, two types of Danish licorice that, apart from Chandani, and well, Marcus loves it. I don't know if I've actually forced you to eat this, but most people really can't eat this. I know Khan and I share a love of Sandlecris. And it's something that is from childhood. Leberwurst on rugbrød for me, really just with ristenvej and maybe some red beets, just fabulous, and just looked at as the weirdest thing. So kind of stereotypicalization, as you recognize with heavily garliced spaghetti sauce. So yeah, no, of course it's part of our childhood. Our brains are much more malleable as children. We create these sort of neuronal connections. I'm sure we could talk more about the biochemistry of this, but yeah, no, that's part of living in a culture. So the whole process of enculturation also includes what would I call it, sort of exposure to things at a very early age, so they become tightly tied to feelings of comfort and safety and home.
Tom Dubois, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you so much for this. It was really, really cool. And I was thinking of one more future project direction to go with it. And that I was thinking about Hannah Snellman's work with early Finnish cookbooks. And in that case, what was the case is that the cookbooks were made for Finnish cooks who were going to be employed in American households or English households. So they're kind of a picture of what these English people eat. And so to compare what gets the flavor networks in that imagined American diet versus what you'd find in Finnish diets as what you're talking about, national foods, would be a really interesting kind of way to look at that assimilation, but also that kind of imagining of what's the flavor network of a culture.
Yeah, and thanks to these amazing co-researchers, collaborators, we have this pipeline. So this actually would be something that we could do. I do think we need to fine-tune our LLMs a little bit better. I sent out a frantic message about 2 hours ago. We've got a systematic problem here with corn, and that's an LLM problem, but that's easily fixed.
And Tim, LLM is?
Oh, a large language model. That's what you often are using when you chat with an AI. There's some large language model sitting behind there.
Astrid, hello. I love the whole thing with AI and putting all those together, but it seems a little bit of a chicken and an egg question because you said architecture and the flavor. That it's flavor driven or ingredient driven, because if you're going to make a soup in Southern Europe, you're going to have different ingredients than you are a soup in middle of Sweden. So, your first step, is it flavor driven or ingredient driven in the story? And then the story evolves, and part of cooking is structure, function. So you put some things together because the end product is like a finished product. It's a melding of those things, not necessarily flavor, but food chemistry, cooking. Anyway, so it's just an interesting paradigm. It's flavor putting these things together, but also it's chicken and the egg. Is like the structure of the ingredients that
I think I did a very bad job of explaining this. So, the recipes are made up of ingredients, right? And the ingredients are probably limited by what you have at hand, but also could be influenced by things like kolonivarer, right? So, and there's status associated with kolonivarer or colony goods, things. So, but the flavor is there inherently in every ingredient. You can't get away from that. So what we're trying to do is surface what those flavors are that are connecting all of these ingredients in recipes, and how those recipes then together as a collection in a book represent the potential of the entire sort of flavor landscape of each one of these cookbooks, which are historically situated. But they're historically situated in such a way that Frøken Jensen's is really part of that emergence of an imagined community of Danes all cooking and eating similarly. Yeah. This is going to be a hard question, so I'm going to give that to one of the team.
Now, I was thinking actually, because on the front page of Frøken Jensen, it was sort of city center, probably Copenhagen, which actually has a lot to say about the writer and where they pick up their goods. Is it an interesting perspective to also look at the biodiversity of Denmark, let's say where the actual book is written and what kind of products is taken from that place? Because you get inspired probably by where you write the book.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, and one that we Caroline Nyvang looks at in one of the articles that we referenced here. What's interesting about Denmark by the early 20th century, Denmark's tiny, and it's also kind of unified in this context of what is Danish, right? And so Frøken Jensen sort of fills that need. I know that Frøken Jensen was sort of on the bookshelf in my maternal grandparents' home, both her maternal and paternal homes, one in Vendsyssel, one down in Sønderjylland, and then of course also in Copenhagen. So there's kind of this imagination of Denmark through Frøken Jensen's, but then, as you point out, the regional implementation of that is going to be quite different. And we don't have that, But I hope with the ethnographic collections, we can maybe find these cards where people have been exchanging recipes that are not passed down through the ages by their parents, but are actually usually or quite often copied from things like Fröken Jensen. A very quick anecdote. I was given an index card under sort of, great pain of death if I lost this index card, because it was my mother's recipe for æbleskivur. And I guarded this card. And I actually was talking to my maternal grandmother, and I said, I have the recipe card. And she goes, you hold on to that. That's my grandmother's æbleskivur recipe, which she gave me on a card, but I've got my own card. And I lost the card.
Oh, Jesus, Tim.
And I was like, oh shit, what will I do? Plus I have friends coming over and I'm going to make them æbleskivur. Right? I had the pan. I had my grandmother's old æbleskivur pan, but I no longer had the card. So I pulled down Fröken Jensen's, and I opened it up to æbleskivur. It wasn't like a similar recipe. It was the exact same recipe with all the ingredients and measures in the exact same order as the Fröken Jensen, right? So it has this incredible ability to sort of like, sort of infiltrate even the sort of folk imagination of, these are our ancient recipes handed down from the times of, Gorm the Old or something like that. It's like, no, it's æbleskivur. It's actually a pretty recent invention. So, yeah.
I have a question. I'm curious if there's any interest or plan to map this alongside like music or stories or other things that are woven into how we share food recipes. Like, I think, at least in my own culture, I think about like hip hop, like Ham and Eggs. There's songs about our food, there's songs about fried chicken or whatever. There's songs about our food, stories about our food that are outside of recipe books. And I'd be curious to see how these flavor networks map along the other aspects of folklore, storytelling, cultural, flavor, so to speak.
She just gave you a very big assignment.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking. That's why I turned to the That's why I turned to the youngsters on the team, the ones with energy.
Sure. I think the first thing I think about is like, yes, absolutely. There are different ways to explore culture, and I think food is one of them. And then food goes into so many other forms of culture, as you talked about. I don't know what that would look like in terms of computation, but I do know that it would be very interesting to pick up, say, the songs or the media of that particular time. So if we're looking at Fröken Jensen, looking at what was circulating amongst the public at that particular time in a particular region, something like that, and then being able to do some sort of like analysis, maybe like something more nuanced than, say, sentiment, something that actually tells us, okay, how did what the public was thinking about XYZ song, XYZ movie, XYZ newspaper lead to, say, the inclusion of a new sort of, say, ingredient or new recipe within the book we have. I think this is also very true when you look at things like sociocultural, like trade. Like when, say, at a particular point, there's a new trade route, you'd see a new ingredient come into your flavor network because, we just got a new spice. It's kind of cool. Let's start using it. So I feel like it's possible. I don't know what it would look like computationally, but I think it would be pretty cool to do. Yeah.
The big consideration with any of this is where do you get the data to connect the two, and how do you know what is connecting? With this project, it was a big task of how do you extract the right information and ignore the rest, and finding a source of information would be key, and then finding out how to get exactly what you're looking for would be key. And yeah, none of us currently know enough about databases to be able to ideate even of a good way to do this is, the real answer.
Yeah, and then there's some methodological things. Once you do get, if you were to get all of this data, which is great, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see it in film. I'd love to see it in literature. I'd love to see it in song. I'd even love to see it in dance. I don't know that people really dance obscure, but if they don't, they should, right? And then we're in the realm of what we call multimodal modeling. And that's actually like beyond cutting edge. It's like bleeding edge in all of these things. It's very, very difficult to do. But we might then be able to estimate some sort of complex representation of a cultural space that means a great deal to us, but is distant because it's in the past and hasn't been documented, and it's impossible to document it at the level that we would want to document it.
Yes, hello, my name is Magnus, software quality assurance specialist. So I'm more in the data engineering field then. I'm just a little bit curious, now you've done all this analysis, but then could you maybe use this more in a generative way to, let's see, okay, now we move to America from Scandinavia. I would like to have this dish, but I don't have those ingredients and the flavors, and more or less just come up or say, I would like to have those flavors in my recipe to do things like that. Is that something that you have been looking into?
It's certainly possible. I mean, that's what we were getting at in future work, right? So predictive analytics, right? So how would it, for example, you give the example of flavor, ingredient substitution to get the same flavor compounds, right? And so I want it to taste the same, but I don't have access to that. And so then you would do this kind of search across the ingredient space. That would be something that Chandini would probably know more about.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think humans have been doing this for a long time as immigration has, occurred. It would, be a matter of then extracting like what the flavor molecules you're interested in, and then searching widely what the equivalents are, and then picking the nearest equivalent, and then making a recipe based on that. So from a data standpoint, we would theoretically have all of the data to do that, and it's possible with the right sort of engineering, and it would just be a matter of figuring out the best way to engineer it.
And actually, it might be pretty cool. We might be able to do like a chatbot sort of thing, which is like helping you in the kitchen. You have someone you just like send a text to, like, hey, I want to make this. I don't have this ingredient. What can I use instead? And it's very like conversational, sort of like Ratatouille-esque in the sake of reference. So I think
at the same time, I want to point out that we don't see cooking and cuisine as an engineering problem. We see it really as a culture question, right? And so we can use sort of these data engineering approaches, but when it comes down to it, it really comes down to, as we've been hearing, about the story that you're trying to tell as you make these recipes. But I think that's actually we can merge these things together. I think this could be quite a bit of fun. It might not taste good, but it'd be really a lot of fun.
And we have a question from another chef. So Tim, you may want to hand the microphone
I'm definitely
off.
handing it over. Marcus hasn't talked, so this is from Marcus.
So firstly, just wow. I guess this is what happened when smart people like food. So my question is, did you find any ingredients that chemically should mix perfect, but never were mixed?
That's your domain.
To reword your question, you're saying, what about the possibility that an ingredient has the same flavor compounds but just doesn't work in the context of a recipe?
Never were mixed, but they should work, but never were mixed. Tried.
To me, it's definitely possible. I think coming up with the possibility of an ingredient that should work seems to me right now more an ingenuity thing and more of a human skill than something necessarily an LLM can do. An LLM is really what data you presently have and what it can interpolate between from that information, and then stay within the same realm, really. So it's difficult to go outside of the box in that way from just a computational method like this. I think ingenuity and what chefs do a lot of the time would be outside of an LLM still.
But there might be what we call a recommender space, right? So you've probably, if you've ever been on like, oh, I don't know, any site on the internet ever, and you're looking for, you know, music, or you're looking for a book, it's like, oh, you like this book, you might like this book, right? So you like this ingredient, you might like this ingredient. So we could kind of think about this using some sort of cosine similarity space and come up with a fuzzy recommender system. If that would be helpful, yeah. I mean, you're boiling everything, right? So I mean, so you got like this space of boiled meat, right? And it's sort of like, well, what's like boiled reindeer? It's like, well, I don't know, maybe boiled elk, so that might work.
Yeah.
Just a suggestion.
I think another thing that could be really interesting is that now that we kind of have this whole system like standardize this across all recipes, then if we look at other places outside of Scandinavia and we're like, hey, like in, for example, Korea, where they have a lot more like very drastic flavor changes in the dishes, they can kind of use those same flavor compounds to be like, in Scandinavia, we have these two things that typically don't go together, that like in Korea, they really, really love this, we can try this out. So I think kind of that kind of what tastes good and what doesn't taste good is kind of more of a human thing, where like humans can decide if it tastes good or if it doesn't taste good. But like chemically speaking, we know that if humans in this part of the world really like these flavors together, then we can try it out with these sort of ingredients, have the same flavors over here. And I think although, we have a lot of different ingredients all over the world, it's really about how we also prepare the ingredients. Like we still pickle stuff. You pickle stuff in Korea, you pickle stuff in Scandinavia too. And that kind of creates a very similar flavor basis. I think is very, very interesting to see kind of how we can interpret the ingredients and kind of see similarities across different places with different ingredients and kind of all aligned with the same flavor space at the end of the day on a chemical level.
I have one more question. Being a Scandinavian person and seeing a lot of old cookbooks and also been cooking a lot of old school cooking, you realize that the actual flavor profile is not actually, in a way, if you compare it to the actual food, it's not what you thought it would be. Because when you look at the flavor profile, it's more or less like a plant-based flavor profile. Because so far out, you actually get the animal products. So would you say that it's a correct conclusion that the Nordic countries are coming out of a plant-based flavor profile?
It has a way. It's related to the way that we're drawing these graphs, so that's not to say that there aren't these strong meat flavors, right? And bouillon just kind of like appears everywhere in these networks. So it's not intensity of flavor. It's presence and connections of flavors that we're modeling. We're not modeling intensity. We're also not modeling how the human person tastes the flavor. It's more the flavor compounds and their connections, right? So it's a different question than the very good one that you're asking. I don't really know how to get to the one that you're asking, so that's why we use these proxies, right? We use ingredients and the flavor compounds in the ingredients as a proxy for taste. But as you're right, it's a flavor landscape that we're modeling with the connections between these flavor molecules as kind of the underlying thing, and not the intensity of actual taste. We also don't talk about mouthfeel. We haven't worked with cooking preparations. So as we started to get into this, we started to realize just how complex this is. But at least this is a first level approximation of that flavor landscape that you all recognized. And yet, as you point out, it's not how really you experience the taste, because we can't model the intensity yet. So
I think we have time for one more. Ted, do you want to take it?
Thank you. I was wondering, I can't even imagine how you would do this, but if you asked for memories relative to these various tastes, And I was wondering if that might bring back even age-related memories or maybe, you know, ethnic celebrations or something like that. But it's obviously based on taste, but it's going back to the ethnicity, I guess, of the people who are represented by these recipes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of us are probably going to experience this in a couple of weeks, right? So we're going to celebrate, or many of us are going to celebrate Thanksgiving, and we're going to come back, and we're going to have weird political conversations, and there's going to be a football game playing. And then in that context, we're also going to have, you know, some dishes that sort of activate certain memories and certain times and certain relationships. Food is relational, right? So that's another wonderful thing that we get by having a network model. Is it keeps in mind the fact that food is relational, right? It's something that we do with each other. We do it. We form bonds. We form memories. We form social networks. And I love the idea of each one of us walking around with our memory networks that can be activated by different foods and experiences of those foods. That's why you also get, as we were talking about, you know, the other day, the authenticity police coming into, you know, ethnic restaurants, you know, basically that's not the way it's made because it doesn't activate the memories in the same way, and yet they're there, right, to have some, you know, set of memories activated, so make some new memories. So you're absolutely right, and this is certainly one of the things why I think it's so important to keep in mind the ethnographic dimension, that this really is about connection between people, not just contemporaneously, but as we heard earlier, through time as well, right? And then as we experience the food, it activates memories, and it also creates new memories, right? So it's a constant evolving thing. And then that becomes kind of an interesting area where we can start to experience. Marcus was saying, well, let's bring in some of these things that should work in Scandinavia from something as far away as Korea, right? Now, Scandinavia and Korea, both peninsulas, just saying, there might be something there.
The other thing that comes to mind is that cookbooks nowadays, at least, have little blurb sections per recipe. And those blurbs sometimes talk about memories or festivals that are related to the recipe. And that would be an interesting way to correlate that information. And that's not necessarily within the scope of historical cookbooks. That isn't so common within historical cookbooks. But if you were to do the same process with modern cookbooks, it could be possible. The information is available.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap the questions, the formal questions here. I'm going to give you all a 3 to 4 minute bathroom break, and then we're going to call our presenters back up for a quick summary discussion up on the stage here. But go ahead and grab a coffee and take about 4 minutes, and we'll get things set up.